Hi guys, I recorded this video before, sorry that there was no audio, but I'm going to try my best to redo exactly what I did and hopefully do it a little bit better. So this is going to be a UV unwrapping tutorial, so I'm just going to start really quick and we're just going to make a box. Now hopefully you guys all remember how to make a box, left click and drag to make the length and width, and let go left click and move it upwards to make the height. Now I'm just going to make a box, it could be any parameters I want, but I'm going to make some more segments here to increase the wireframe. I'm going to turn on edge faces, and now you can see this box has more polygons that I can play with. So I'm going to go to edit poly mode, and I'm just going to modify my box. So this is just going to be like a new object sort of thing. And I want to make it a little more complicated than just a box. I'm going to do some simple extrusions here, like that. And I'm going to make a couple more extrusions here. This. Extrude in. There we go. And I'm going to delete the underneath here because I don't need the floor. No one's going to go in this building. It's just going to be the outside of a building. And I'm just going to modify the vertexes a little bit to create a little roof. Okay. So when you're working on an object, now this isn't that complicated of an object. It's a really simple object. What you want to do to get a nice unwrap is to add a new modifier to your stack. Now we're going to add the Unwrap modifier. So Unwrap UVW modifier. So what the Unwrap modifier does is it basically takes your 3D object here, which I'll maximize the viewport here for you guys, the 3D object here, and it tries to lay it out completely flat in 2D so that we can draw on it in Photoshop. So what you need to do is under Unwrap UVW, you see all your new parameters that are opening up. And one of the things we'll notice is at the top here, we have vertex, edge, and polygon. Just like edit poly mode, you're able to play around with vertex, edges, and polygons. But the one thing you might notice is that if you push WER, we can't move, we can't rotate, we can't scale. That's because you're not modifying the 3D object. We need to modify the 2D unwrap of a 3D object. So how we do that in 3D Studio Max is you add the Unwrap UVW modifier, and you go to Edit UVs, and you go to Open UV Editor. Now this opens a new window, and this is called the Edit UVW windows. And as you can see, what's inside this checkered box, if you click around especially, does not match what's in our 3D scene. If I keep clicking here, you can see that the polygons don't really match up to what I have in this box. That's because 3D Studio Max does an automatic unwrap of your object as best as possible to the original shape, which was our box. And when we started modifying it, it just didn't know what we were doing. It doesn't keep track of any of that. That's why we have to modify our Unwrap UVWs. So what you can do is you can grab all the polygons. But wait, it looks like I grabbed all the polygons, but if I rotate around the object, I actually didn't. That's because we're ignoring anything that's not visible to the camera with the selection tool when we're in Unwrap UVW because of a special selection tool called Ignore Backfacing. If we just turn that off, we can now select all the polygons of our 3D model. Okay? And you notice that when I select polygons from the 3D model here, it selects them here in our Edit UVW window as well. And if I deselect here, we'll just deselect a whole bunch. You'll notice that things are being deselected in this window, but if I hold Control and in this window, I can add and deselect just in this window alone. Both of these work in tandem together, so don't be afraid of not looking in one window and looking in the other. It's okay to work in both of these windows. In fact, if you have dual screen, I would recommend you switch this to a different screen. So what we need to do is begin the unwrap process. So in order to unwrap an object, you kind of have to, I know this will be very different for each model, but in my model, I'm looking at the sides and I go, okay, I have like about 4 sides. I have the top, I have the bottom, I have a door. And then I want to select the polygons and I want to do what's called projection unwrapping. This is my way of unwrapping. There are many tutorials on different ways to unwrap, including seam use. But for me, I like projection unwrapping, so that's what I'm going to go for right now. So I look down my modifier list and I see projection mapping. So I go, okay, so first off, I want to select the front of my house. So I'm going to select the front of my house. Just like that. And I'll select here and that. So now I got the entire front of my house selected. Now inside my texture map, when you look at it especially, it's not looking like our house. One of the easiest ways to tell how a texture is going to come out is what's called the checkerboard. And you can see a checkerboard pattern here, but what we want to do is see the checkerboard pattern on top of our 3D model. So if it looks like a checkerboard on top of our 3D model, that means it's going to look good and unstretched. If the checkerboard looks stretched out and wrong in all these weird ways, then that means it's probably not going to come out very good. So in the top right corner, we have a checker pattern option that's normally highlighted, and that's just to enable the background checkerboard pattern. But if I click it again, it enables a checker pattern on my 3D object. Now you can see that some of it came out good and some of it came out really wrong. So what we want to do is start tearing it apart into pieces so that we're able to color on top of it. So I'm going to use my planar map here, projection map, and then what you're telling it, your 3D object with a projection map, is essentially making a virtual camera, and this is how it's going to look at the selected polygons to lay it out in your texture map. Now, if I click planar map, it's going to try and look at it flatly. If I click on a cylindrical, it's going to try and wrap around the entire object, all on the sides. And if I click on spherical, it's going to try and rotate a camera all around the different parts of my object, etc., with box. Once I click on one mode, you'll notice that an orange box appears. Now that's how the camera is looking at your 3D object. Now we also have alignment options. We're still in projection mode. It's blue, which means it's enabled. Now we have to play around with the alignment to make sure it's aligned correctly. You'll even notice the checkerboard pattern looks all wrong now. So we have to make it aligned. So X is not the proper alignment. Y is the proper alignment. And you'll see what happens if we do Z. Everything's kind of messed up looking. So I'll go to Y. And that looks good. It still looks a little bit stretched out though. So I'm going to turn off projection mode right now. And in my edit UVWs, we have move, rotate, and scale. So I'm going to move my selected UVs away. Okay. Right here. Out of the workspace. Anything that's in this checkerboard area is the workspace, like the final workspace. Anything outside here is like your temporary zone where you do like your pre-work, your like previs work. So I'm going to drag everything out of that box. So now all my polygons are out of that box. I'm going to start modifying this part because what I noticed when I separated it and made the projection, planar flat here, it's not really a checkerboard pattern. It's more like a whole bunch of rectangles. So we have move, rotate, and scale. Now pushing the R key over and over again isn't going to change the type of scaling it is. We actually have to left click and hold on this scale tool, and we can see a horizontal and vertical icon. Don't be afraid if it looks a little different than mine. So I'm going to scale it horizontally. And you'll see now I'm forming the proper checkerboard pattern. The more it's precise on a checkerboard, the less stretched out your UV map will be. And when we apply texture, it won't be like all stretched and scaled really wrong. So that's essentially what we have to do for every part of our model. Every time we want a separate part of the texture map done, we have to select the polygons. I think that'll be okay. Why don't I select this entire side? You select your polygons. You choose the best projection type. So if you have a more object that looks cylindrical, or you want to wrap around, let's say, a leg or an arm, or even a sword, you can use the cylindrical map piece by piece on your selected polygons. So select the appropriate polygons. And let's say for this one, I want another planar map. I choose the right alignment, X, Y, Z. Okay, looks like X is my best bet. And then I turn off the projection map, and I drag it where I want. So use the move tool, and I drag it off the workspace. And then I do my stretching and scaling to make sure everything kind of looks like a checkerboard pattern. Now you'll notice the side of my wall here looks pretty good. That's a nice checkerboard. But on top here, I got some stretching issues. Now, this isn't something I could just fix with the stretch and scale tool on its own. I'm actually just going to go to my Unwrap UVW, go to Vertex, and I'm going to grab vertexes with the move tool and adjust them manually. And you see, I can adjust the texture map myself to look good. And let's see, I notice this. And this might need a little bit more room here. And if I move my polygons here, I get a little bit of that. There you go. So now I have the side of my house, which I'm going to scale and adjust to kind of match the front of my house. A little bit less than that. So now I have the front and side of my house done. I continue doing my work and I go to the other side, and I'm pretty much going to do the identical texture map here. I'm going to use my planar. I'm going to stretch and scale. So I get a nice checkerboard. Then I'm going to adjust the top with just my Vertex tools. Remember, you want everything to look like a checkerboard pattern. The closer it is to a checkerboard pattern, the better everything's going to look. And you can use polygon mode, you can use vertex mode, you can use edges, whatever works best for you. This is all, literally, there are like so many different ways to unwrap an object, and there's a lot of different tools to use. So don't be afraid to just like start doing what I'm doing and going around your object, selecting polygons, using different projection maps, and just making sure that you get a decent checkerboard result. So I go checkerboard, right there. So really, it didn't take me too long, and I got the front, back, and sides of my house here all done. The last thing I have is my door. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my entire door, including the side frames here. And I'm going to use another planar here, lay it flat there. And I'm going to scale it a bit. So what I noticed when I did this is I had the frame here still attached to the front of the door. Now you can see how little the space of the frame is taking here. So even if I were to stretch in the inside of the door to give the frame some room, it's still kind of a little bit awkward to play around with. So I want to detach the frame of the door away from the actual, door here. I want to attach the doorway. So I'm going to detach the doorway. I'm going to grab all the polygons of the doorway, and I'm going to click Tools and Break. I'm going to use the Move tool, and I'm going to. So I broke the door frame off the door. See that? Right there. So the break tool is good if you have different parts of your mesh and you want to like sort of texture them differently and you want to separate them out. This is the best way to do it. It creates seam lines, which are the green lines we're seeing. And now we know that this is the doorway and this is the actual door. I'm just going to scale it in like this. There you go. So now I have my door, but my door is separate from my door frame. And I saved room by scaling it just a little bit and putting it inside here, leaving a little bit of room for my texture, so when I draw it out, there's a little bit of room. And then so when I put it in my final box for the rendering, it'll all fit nicely. So I think I have pretty much everything I need done, but I'm seeing a couple issues I have. For instance, the front of my house, I grabbed a polygon by accident. So if I click this polygon, we're going to notice, oh no, I grabbed it and it's kind of floating around. Or if it's attached to something else, we can use the tools and we can use break to detach it. But it's just a floating polygon right now. So I need to weld it to these other vertices here so that it goes back to where it should be. Because right now we can't have two seam lines like this. Even putting it close like this, just your guesswork is not going to be good enough because we're going to get that weird seam line, and if we start drawing, it's going to look a little bit awkward. So what we want to do is go to vertex mode, and we go to tools, and we go to target weld. Now what target weld does is it allows you to select one vertex, and if you left click and hold, a W appears, and it's looking for something to weld with. What you're going to notice, I know it might be pretty hard to see, is that when I select this vertex here, this vertex goes blue. Other vertexes don't go blue, but this one does. That's because it's its partner vertex. In the 3D mesh, the blue vertex here is actually the same exact vertex here. So in our 3D mesh, they're welded. But here, they're not welded. So we need to weld them. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. You're going to notice as I weld all the corners of this, the green lines start disappearing and turning white. They're no longer a seam. They're not broken. They're together. And the seam is now fixed all around our 3D model. The same thing happened over here to the side of this wall. If I can just turn off this. There we go. The side of this wall detached by accident. So I'll do the same thing. I'll go to vertex mode. I'll go to tools, target weld, and then I weld these together just by left clicking and holding and dragging it over the other vertex. I welded those together. There you go. So that was, we broke some models apart into different pieces. We broke the door frame from the door. We target welded. So what I want to show you next is how to render out a UV map. So I'm going to scale all these and fit them in my checkerboard box here. Because I want my final result, I'm just going to grab these. Excuse me. Hold Control to grab more polygons. Hold Alt to grab less polygons. And I'm going to fit them all in this box. Now, if the checkerboard pattern is really blocking your view and you kind of don't know where to adjust things, in the top right, there should be a tool called Show the Active Map in the dialog, and you can turn that on and off so you get a better view of what you're looking at. Okay? So then once you got your unwrap laid out and everything looks okay, the unwrap looks good here, what we can do is we can go to Tools, and we go down to Render UVW Template. Now, Render UVW Template has a lot of default settings, which you don't really have to play around with too much. But the important one is the width and the height. If you want to put more detail in your texture map, make the number bigger. And always try and work in a square format at the power of 2. So 256, 5 by 12, 512 by 512, 1024 by 1024, 2048 by 2048, etc., etc. Unity and other game engines work best with power of 2 images. So please do that. By default, max is set to 1024, which is perfectly fine for me. It's forcing two-sided, which is okay. So the next option is fill. So you can actually fill this texture map with a solid color, a normal map, or a shaded color. But right now, we don't really need to play around with too much with that either, because it's just really changing the colors. And if you leave it like this, if you render out a PNG that's transparent, you can actually overlay it in Photoshop, and you can see the wireframe while you draw your texture, which is really, really handy. And then you can obviously show edges, visible edges, invisible edges, show seam edges. And then, finally, you have Render UV Template. If you click that button, while everything is inside this checkerboard box that you need, you can Render UVW Template, and you get this, which is perfect. This is our UV map. This is now what we draw on and apply to our model, and it will show up perfectly. So I'm going to save this image. In the top left corner, you get your options: save, copy, print, etc. I'm just going to click Save Image. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and I'm going to save it as, let's say, wireframe 2. I'm going to save it as type. I'm going to save it as a JPEG or a PNG. Right now, I'm going to save it as a JPEG, wireframe 2. Save. It'll ask you the quality, 100%, perfect. Okay, and done. And now you're done with your object. Your UV map is okay. I'm going to close my edit poly just by pushing the minus sign here. I'm going to close my unwrap UV, and I'm going to get out of my modify panel. And now I have my object, and it's all unwrapped. Now we need to apply the unwrap. So I push M to go to the material editor. And I'm going to create a standard material. In my left-hand side bar, I'm going to double-click standard material, and it's going to create that material. I double-click on the title, and I'm going to give it a name in the right parameter box. I'm going to call it, this is called house. So now it's named house. And I can give it a color too. So where it says ambient and diffuse, I can click either one of these because they're linked together. And I will just give it a nice red color. Now, our model isn't changing because we need to apply the texture to it. We need to apply this material. So I right-click on the title while my object is selected here. I right-click on the title and I go Assign Material to Selection. And now my model turns red. Anytime I change this color, it will change on my model. So that works out fine so far. Next step is right beside diffuse with the red, there's a little box. And if you hover above it, it says none. Well, we can click on none and we can load up a map or material. And it loads up the material map browser for us. Now, 3D Studio Max has a lot of default material types, but what we want to do is load our own image. So we go to bitmap, and you can double click that, and it's going to ask us to load an image from a location. I saved my image to the desktop as wireframe 2. I see that here, and I click on it, and I look and make sure it's the 1024, it's wireframe 2 on my desktop, perfect. I click open. So what happens is if you double click on this sphere here, and if you double click on this image here, you can expand it a bit, you can see that that's the texture. It's loaded in. But it's not showing up on my model, and I really, really want to see a preview of it in here. So what I can do is I can right click on the title again, and I can scroll down the list of options until it says Show Shaded Material in Viewport. If I click that, and I'm going to turn off edge traces here, you can see that my material is now attached to my house. I'll just move this off the screen a bit. There you go. So now, if I were to open a program like Paint, I know Paint's a very, very bad program, but let's say I open up Paint, I open up Wireframe 2, and I, let's say, just draw something really, really quick on my 3D model. I'm going to draw an arrow here, triangle there, star here. Let me just do a better scaled star, just better example. There you go. Talk box here, an arrow going up here. And I'm just going to save this really quick. Control S, just save it. Watch what happens. It's already inside 3D Studio Max. It was loading my image file. It reloaded the JPEG once it found out there was a difference. And boom, already done. I have a texture on top of my 3D model. Now, obviously take your time and start drawing out your texture even more. And save it. And then go back. So that it looks like your proper 3D model. Now, here's where some of you may run into trouble. Let's say I have this house. And I'm going to give this another material just for a second. And I'm going to make it really, really high poly by adding a mesh smooth. So I'm just in edit poly mode. I'm going to add a mesh smooth. I made this ridiculously high poly, put it on classic. Don't worry about the steps I'm doing right now. I'm just making it really high poly. Because some of you may have high poly meshes like this. You're going to run into a lot of trouble because if you go to Unwrap UVW, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of polygons to play with, okay? And chances are it's going to look really messed up, like probably something like, this is my entire house, but it's a blob, okay? What you need to do is start to determine the shapes of your 3D model and break them apart into pieces using these projection maps. So normally what I like doing, like I said, first thing, I turn off ignore back facing. I'll select my entire model, and I'll try and guesstimate which projection mapping type works best for me. So I'll work on cylindrical right now. And I go, okay. I'll turn on my checker pattern. And I know there's also texture checker. If you want the shortcut key for turning on and off edge faces in a 3D Studio Max viewport, click in the viewport and push F4. So I can see okay, my texture map's looking pretty wonky. The roof and some of the sides look really, really bad. So I'm going to detach my roof just for a second. So I'm going to take away just about that. Yeah, that's my roof. I'm going to Tools. I'm going to use Break. So I break apart my roof. Everything else is okay. I kind of don't mind this. But there's a big problem with it. Everything's kind of stretched out. Now I can use my scale tool. But I still notice some stretching, in all these different parts. Things are not looking so great. So what I can do is I'm going to use a special tool called Tools Relax. And what it will do is it will smooth out the polygons in the 2D space to match what it looks like in your 3D space. There are 3 different modes to Relax tool. There's Relax by polygon angles, Relax by edge angles, and Relax by centers. Now centers is normally meant for spherical objects. But what I want is Relax by, let's say, I'll try edges. Start relax. And you can see my model's trying to start relaxing itself. It's trying to smooth out. But it didn't do that great of a job in some places, but other places it did pretty good. You can see it's starting to look more like a checkerboard. You can see what it looked like before on these edges. And if I start relaxed and stop again, see everything's looking a little bit better. Now this is going to help you quite a bit. So we're going to try polygon angles. Polygon angles looks like it's squishing everything a little bit better. Now, there are certain places that's still going to have trouble. For instance, my doorway is still having trouble. So I'm going to have to obviously take more time, grab different polygons, relax. For instance, I might just take away the entire doorway, detach, and use the break tool here, and move this away. And I'm going to relax just these portions. So that on its own, and that on its own. And you can see I get a much better result. So the more I detach and the more I can weld it back together afterwards because I'm not worried about that. Because literally you can see if I touch these polygons, the same thing happens with the vertexes before. Remember a vertex turns blue if you grab one vertex and its partner vertex is there. This is the same thing that happens with edges and polygons. This one turns blue on this edge because it's telling me, hey, this polygon is actually a partner. The polygon you have selected is actually a partner with this edge. So you can weld them together later on. See, this polygon, all three of these edges should go here. And I can weld it together and put it back together again. So even though you break things apart, you can weld them back together again after you're done unwrapping. So if I keep breaking these apart, and I'm like, okay, tools, I'm going to use break. And I'm going to relax this part. I'm going to let it relax for a little bit. Remember, you can change the iteration amount. Iterations, the amount of the strength of the relaxing and the stretching it can do. And you can just stop it after a few seconds, normally at its best. But you can see I can just grab this, grab all this. And it's showing me the edges to weld to here. And this one is now showing me all the edges to weld into here. So if I grab this and I bring it really, really close, well, I can weld these back together again by going Tools, Vertex, and Target Weld. And now instead of being two separate pieces that I relaxed, I can weld them back together. And you can see those seam lines are disappearing. So now my texture is going to look a lot better if I just smooth things out themselves. And if I weld these together, I can relax it yet again and make sure that all these polygons are looking smooth. So it's, unwrapping is all about taking your time. There are different methods that work for different people. And for me, even though it's a little bit tedious, the projection mapping, I think, gives some of the best manual results. And I think if you learn this process first before trying to do anything too automatic, you're going to get the hang of it a lot quicker. So just, take your time, practice with it, unwrap your objects and your assignments, and I'm sure you'll get a good look. See, I just relaxed it one more time. Now everything is flush over here. And now I just got to keep doing it to the different parts of my 3D model and keep welding them together, because my next step is I'll grab these parts here and I'll re-weld it to this part here, etc. And you go on and on like that. So the 3 tools to memorize are target weld, which you left click and drag one vertex to another to weld it. You break apart your objects in different pieces so you can work easier together. Now we can use stitch selected, but I like to use the weld for now because stitching is kind of like, I'll show you guys that a little bit later on when we get more detailed. And then relaxing to help you smooth out polygons to match your 3D object better if it's more complicated. And then there's render UVW template, which helps you render out your UV so that you can use it. And you can see, remember, that I only see this portion because that's the only part that's in this blue box here. So remember that you can only render what's in this checkerboard box right here. Don't forget the checker pattern at the top to look at your 3D model in that checker pattern, please. Don't forget you can turn this on and off. And just play around with it. Have a great time with it. Rewatch the tutorial if you're having a lot of trouble, or even look up different tutorials. Different people have different methods of working. This is going to be something that's going to take time, so take your time with it. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in class next time I see you.